Let's do some more practice with writing claims and hypothesis pairs. Once again, the first question we must ask ourselves is, are we talking about a mean or a proportion? Reminding ourselves that mean is represented with mu and proportion is represented with little p. Now, in problem 6, the question mentions a proportion of drivers, so we'll begin by writing p. In problem 10, we have a percentage given to us. So even though we don't have the word proportion mentioned directly, the fact that it says percentage means we'll be using p. So we'll write a p down to remind ourselves of that. Number 2, let's ask ourselves what's being claimed. Let's read through question 6. It says the proportion of drivers stopped by the police in a year is different from 10.3%. Now, different from means not equal, which is an equal sign with a slash through it. And 10.3%, we have to represent this as a decimal number, not a percentage. And this is the same thing as saying 0.103. Therefore, we'll write that our claim says that little p is not equal to 0.103. Now, problem 10 reads, less than 9% of Flint, Michigan residents have a lead concentration of 15 parts per billion or more. The operative words here are less than. Less than is going to be this symbol pointing to the left. And 9% is the same thing as saying 0.09 probability or proportion. So we'll say that our claim will say p is less than 0.09. Question 3 now, we ask ourselves, is the claim null or alternate? The null hypothesis is represented with HO, and alternate is represented with H1. Let's remind ourselves again that the null hypothesis will have equals, less than or equal, or greater or equal, and alternate will have not equal, strictly less, or strictly greater. Let's look to our symbol. Our first symbol in number 6 says not equal, and that falls in the alternate category. So we'll place an H1 next to this claim. We see in problem 10 that we have a strictly less than sign. This is also an alternate symbol, so we'll place an H1 next to this as well. Now that we know this, let's look to the opposite of the claim and ask ourselves if it's null or alternate. In problem 6, since we already have an alternate, we must include a null. And the opposite of not equal is equal. So we'll put an equal sign in the middle, but we'll keep the same symbol and the same number. Now, for problem 10, once again, we have an alternate hypothesis, so we must also include a null. Now, if we've already used less than, the opposite of less is greater. But because it's null, we know that null will always contain an equal sign somewhere. So we'll put an equal sign with the greater. And we will keep the same symbol and the same number. Fifth, let's determine what tail the test is. Remember that less than means left tail, greater than means right tail, and not equal to will mean two tail. Once again, we are just looking at the alternate. In problem 6, our alternate says not equal. And we'll call this two-tail. In problem 10, our alternate says less than, and so this will be left tail. Let's keep these 5 steps in front of us and do some more practice with writing hypothesis pairs. Let's go through this list of 5 steps for each problem. Starting with problem 4, the mean height of professional basketball players is at most 7 feet. Now, the first word I see here is the mean height. This tells us that we will be using mu in our claim. We are also claiming that the mean is at most 7 feet. Now, at most means less or equal, which is the less than symbol with a dash under it for equal. We'll also place 7 feet afterwards. Now, let's figure out if this is null or alternate for step 3. We see less than or equal, and less than or equal is underneath the null category. So we'll write that our claim is null, and that claim is mu less than or equal to 7. For step 4, we'll ask ourselves what the opposite is. We've already used less, and the opposite of less is greater. We'll use the same symbol, we'll use the same number, but change the symbol to greater. Now, we ask ourselves, is this null or alternate? Since we've already used null, this must be alternate. Now, is this left tail, right tail, or two tail? Since our alternate is greater than, that means this is right tail. Let's follow the same procedure for problem 5. The proportion of drivers who admit to running red lights is greater than 0.49. Step 1, is this mean or proportion? The second word in the sentence talks about proportion, so that's a clue that this will be a proportion question, and we'll begin by writing P. We ask ourselves now what's being claimed. The claim was that the proportion of drivers running the red lights is greater than 0.49. Greater than will be this symbol. So we'll write greater than 0.49. Now, let's ask ourselves, is this null or alternate? The symbol that we used was greater than, which is this symbol, which is underneath alternate. Therefore, we'll label this with an H1 and label that this is the claim. Now, step 4, we ask ourselves what the opposite is. The opposite of greater is less, and this must be the null because we've already used the alternate. But as we know, the null must contain an equal, so we'll place a mark underneath the less than to show that this is less than or equal for the null. We'll use the same symbol and the same number, and so P is less than or equal to 0.49. Now, let's find out what tail it is. The alternate hypothesis says greater. Therefore, we'll say this is also right tail.